Greetings, parish orphans and retrogrades. Is Catholicism the trend of 2022? This is a question posed not by yours truly, but rather by The Week, which is, I think, a weekly editorial. And it has been trafficked in now, this question, is Catholicism the hot new trend, by Slate Magazine, New York Times, other magazines as well, like First Things, where you'd expect it more probably. And I'll tell you what, the writers at these secular left rags that ask the question are only halfway ironic. They understand that something's happening. Now, of course, the answer to the question is the voracious truth, the one and only truth, capital T truth, who is a God-man, the Logos, Jesus Christ. In one sense, can never be a trend. This is like reducing or trivializing something fine and casting it before swine, like pearls. In another sense, yeah, the truth can come in and out of vogue. And with the swarming herd, with the hoi polloi, the masses, they will embrace it or reject it according to the sign of the times. Things nowadays, the conditions for the possibility of evangelization of the one true faith are pushing people into the faith in at least superficial ways. And we're going to talk about that on today's show, because some of the paragraphs of this week article, which comes from about 2 weeks ago, The Week ran this interesting op-ed, which is not wholly negative, does not answer its titular question wholly in the negative, I should say. And there's stuff you need to hear, parish orphans and retrogrades. We're going to get to that this episode of the show. First, I would request prayers for my grandmother, who passed away early this morning, Linda Hoffman. Please pray for the repose of her soul, as we're not many hours outside of her meeting her particular judgment about five and a half hours ago. Weird day for my family. The family's in disarray in several ways, and so it makes passing so difficult, so much more difficult than death already is. So if I'm a little bit discombobulated today, that's why. I'd appreciate your prayers very, very much for the soul of Linda Hoffman. The Baltimore Catechism class that we're offering 6 days from today, and in terms of the first class, first meeting, is absolutely free to you. If you can't pay for it, we have a suggested donation of $100. It's going to be 8 weeks, Tuesday nights, and it is going to be phenomenal. Join the Baltimore Catechism class on timothyjgordon.com. Go and enroll. If you need to, it's free. Homeschoolers and adult self-educators. Only 500 seats are available, and I think less than 50 remain. So we've filled 450 plus of them. Get in today. By the end of today, they'll probably all be gone. Final word. Get from your blue state to a red state today. Go to realestateforlife.org, just like I did. I went from California, the bluest of the blue, to Mississippi, the reddest of the red. I wish I had at that point, or I knew about at that point, realestateforlife.org. Some good guy will help you get where you need to be, which is a red state, especially for what's coming down the pike, COVID-23 or COVID-24. After the midterm elections, it's not going to be so easy to get out of your blue state. So do it today. realestateforlife.org. The debate over the Catholicism trend is the title of this article on theweek.com. It's written by Grayson Quay on August the 16th. And the subtitle of the article goes like this: Is Catholicism the biggest trend of 2022? Or is there nothing to see here? Here's how it opens. A recent New York Times headline proclaimed that New York's hottest club is the Catholic Church. Written by Julia Yost, a senior editor at the conservative Christian intellectual journal First Things, The essay pointed readers' attention to the Manhattan neighborhood known as Dime Square, where a 2,000-year-old religion is supposedly the hip new trend. I did stream with my friend quite frankly about this. He's a New Yorker, and it was particularly relevant to him right after this article in the New York Times came out. Reactionary motifs are chic. Trump hats and trad wife frocks. Monarchist and anti-feminist sentence. Perhaps the only expression of this contrarian ethics, the ultimate expression of this contrarian aesthetic, is its embrace of Catholicism, Yost wrote. Now, this is an odd piece to write for First Things because, which later got transformed into New York Times article, because of course we understand, you and I, that Catholicism is not contrarianism. It appears as contrarianism because the world will hate us on account of our true Catholic faith. Because the world hated our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ before it hated us, his disciples, his unworthy disciples. And he told us in John's gospel, if it hated me first, it's going to hate you. And, we are called to be a contradiction, a sign of contradiction, I should say, like the sign of the cross in the sky that led Constantine to conquer the pagan Roman world. So you get why those who aren't in the know to call Roman Catholics contrarians. Julia Yost is not in this number that ought to mistake the phantasmagoria, the ontology, the metaphysics, the moral code of Catholicism as contrarianism. Yet she did. She calls it the highest expression of contrarianism or something like that. She ought to know better. Key figures include Honor Levy, who hosts the podcast Wet Brain, and whose fiction has been published in The New Yorker. Levy recently converted to Catholicism and lets you know when she has unconfessed mortal sins on her conscience, Yost writes. Another is Dasha Nekrasova, a Catholic revert and actress with a recurring role on HBO's Succession, who co-hosts the scene's most popular podcast, Red Scare. But are these hip urbanite converts sincere? Are they just role-playing? Or are they so many layers deep in irony that they themselves aren't sure? I'm going to read you the second section of this article as well. But first I want to note, there is something that is trending about Roman Catholicism in the world today, and that is the following. The world is more broken than it's ever been. That doesn't mean we're at the apocalypsis phase of the world. It can get worse. It's hard to imagine. But I remember listening to Glenn Beck 15 years ago or something. Stu said something really normy and embarrassing, like, oh, all ages think that they're the worst. Well, my grandparents thought that. It's probably true, Stu, that your grandpa was part of the worst generation up until that point in history, that juncture. And then the boomers, our parents, got worse, right? This is a dip in a parabola. And then Gen X got worse, and then the millennials got worse. And the moral endemic problems to each individual generation will generate differing levels of culpability. I say the worst is the boomer generation. Why? Because at that point, the conditions for the possibility of a kind of moral revolution against the abiding, still semi-abiding Protestant Christianity in places like America, it required more activation energy. Now the conditions are worse, but the culpability might be less. We've just been raised in the filthy water, so we know it's less filthy. It was less the case with the boomers. That's the way I would distinguish there. But it keeps getting worse, and so the normie sort of vox populi expression of why things aren't as bad as people assume, intoned by Stu on Glenn Beck's show those 14 or 15 years ago, is mathematically not necessarily correct. It's probably wrong. It can keep getting worse generation by generation, and each generation can express in real time. Up to now, things are the worst that they've ever been. 10 years later, the next generation can say, up to now, things are still the worst they've ever been. That doesn't mean they were wrong 10 years earlier. And I would say that I was talking about Aristotelism this morning with a former student of mine. And we were talking about Aristotomist metaphysics. The idea that really between the Protestant Reformation and the middle 1900s, Platonism, the teachings of Plato preponderated. This isn't a show on that, but Aristotelianism had been in decline since at least the Enlightenment, which happened along the same chronological lines as the Reformation. And this itself really leads many into error. Most people don't understand how radically different Aristotelianism is. Really, our metaphysical underpinning is Aristotelianism, it's Catholics. And Platonism leads to all this Gnosticism, the hatred of the body, the misunderstanding of material things, the underplaying of material causes. You really don't understand. We were talking about someone like, Edith Stein, who's on the one hand a feminist, extreme on this end, for a Catholic anyway, but on the other end, she said something so extreme the other way that I wouldn't even say it. She said that males and females have different souls or different natures or essences. This isn't true. And just to justify the claim, even though this is not a show on Aristotelianism, I would flesh out how I would prove that she's wrong for half a moment. And it will show why gender ideology came about now, when it did at this moment in history. Is the female soul different from the male soul? Folks would expect me or my wife, Steph, to say yes, because we say there's this radical difference, engendering a radical complementarity between men and women. And we do. It's a radical difference. But in terms of the essence or the nature or the quiddity, if you will, if I had to dumb it down, the definition of what a human being is, well, we have a species and a genus. We're an animal. We're the rational animal. If you understand this the way Thomas understood Aristotle, our genus is animal. Our radical specific difference is that we're rational. We are the one kind of rational animal. If your dog started talking to you, that would mean it's rational. That would mean it's actually a human, judging by Thomas and Aristotle. So you and I have the same essence in this sense. We are the rational animal. We're not differentiated one from another the way the angels are. I'll talk about that in half a moment. You and your wife are both species of the rational animal, sharing that specific difference. You are an animal, but you're rational. The reason I bring all this up is because of gender ideology. Think of what happened if you say the word gender, then you're brainwashed. Even if you don't think that someone can be a so-called trans. How did this happen? Well, because Platonism has abided over the last 500 years, not Aristotelianism, we're obsessed with forms and we don't understand the cross-fertilization between matter and forms. Matter is quite important in the two worlds of Platonism, and Plato just doesn't get it. Between my wife and I, the main reason that we seem like we might have a different soul, because we're so different, is simply because of our bodies. She has a rational nature. I have a rational nature. We are both human beings, the rational animal. Her body calls her, Steph, to, with her rational nature, do radically different things. She's nursing a baby right now. She's on the computer. To have babies, to nurse them, and to care for them in a mollycoddling maternal way. My same rational nature is called by my opposite body to do vastly different things. Protect, teach, feed, evangelize, because I have a different brain and I have a different body. So it's because we don't understand Aristotle anymore as a popular culture, because we're, if anything, Platonists, best case scenario, Platonists. Christians have been really weak at combating gender ideology. Bodies, that is to say matter, the realm of the material, is quite important. It influences form the way forms or our souls influence our bodies. A human being is only distinguished one from another, not by our specific difference or our species. We'd all have the same soul if we didn't have different bodies. It's quite a profound takeaway principle from something as crude as this fleshy material. Like Yoda says, the pop Buddhism, pop Protestantism, pop Platonism involved in playing down the importance of having different bodies. Many Protestants or Protestants light don't understand that our bodies will be risen at the general judgment. The reason I bring all this up is because I am only different from you, says Aristotle and Thomas, because matter is the principle of individuation. That's the only reason we have different souls. It's not because of the form, the definition of human, the deeper seeming thing. Whereas angels are different one from another by species. They're not differentiated by bodies because they don't have bodies. They're differentiated because they are literally different species. Thomas talks about Raphael has Raphaelity, the way we have humanity. Gabriel has Gabrielity. Michael has Michaelity. They're different species entirely. That's how they're differentiated, in their quiddity. You and I are differentiated only by having different bodies. And so this means that gender ideology pops up precisely when you ought to have expected it. If you're someone if you're in the 1.00001% that understands the truth, like an Ed Phaser or an Eleanor Stump, an Aristo Thomas would understand this is precisely when gender ideology pops up. And this is the ultimate attack on the family, as LifeSite News is always pointing out. If you think bodies are unimportant, then you're going to believe that men can act like women, like a feminist, that men and women can act interchangeably in the bedroom like a homosexualist, and that men and women can actually become one another, should they so want to, like a transsexualist. If bodies are as unimportant as we've been told since the time of the Enlightenment and the Protestant Reformation, which really neither of them privilege Plato intentionally, but they did privilege Plato over Aristotle. So things have gotten worse over the last 10 years than they've ever been. This culminates with transsexualism, and normie conservatives and normie Christians are surprised. Not me. When I look back on it, I see the pedigree of these ideas. I'm not saying I knew it was coming before it came, because I didn't. I was as shocked as you guys. But looking back at the history of ideas, the corruption of the Catholic intellectual tradition, it makes sense. If you pretend, the way the radical Platonist does, that bodies don't matter, then all of a sudden a man can be a woman. Wasn't what I was planning on talking about, but it's an instantiation of the principle. And things are, in fact, worse now than they've ever been. And young people, Michael Malice was talking to someone, Charlie Kirk, about this a couple weeks ago. Young people get red-pilled quicker at age 18, 19, 20 than they did when I was 18, 19, 20. And why? This has to do with the thesis of today's topic, that Catholicism is, in fact, kind of trending. It's because when the conditions are worse and more dire, the need is more exigent and, in some sense, more clear. That's why 18, 19, 20-year-olds red pill quicker than I did. My best students, former students, who happen to be some of my very best friends in the world, are more mature than I was at 23 years old. They red-pilled quicker. They're better Catholics than I was at 23 years old. I'm talking about between 2 and 4 young people who all know who they are, that I'm extremely close with. They are better than I was because at their age, because the times are worse. Right? When things become more pressing, people cut away the BS. And this is my account, my best attempt at an account. It's not false humility. They're just better than I was and more mature than I was. Not to mention they had me as a teacher. I didn't have anyone pushing me this way. But it's mainly the times. It's mainly merit on their individual behalf and the working of the Spirit, as the post-conciliar liberals in the church call it, all to culminate to this greatest storm that they're better Catholics than even me and my 41-year-old revert friends were when we were 22, 23, 24. Much quicker studies. Took me a slow return to the church. Between, starting to study Aristotle in master's degree program, late undergrad, but mainly master's degree program. Then slow return to the church over the next 8, 9, 10 years. Took me to late 20s, early 30s to really get it. I had the Augustine type conversion. That's not as admirable as the St. Paul kind of conversion. And young people now, the really stellar ones that I'm talking about, that I'm blessed to call my friends, they were much closer to the time span of the St. Paul conversion. And I had a couple of these young people, four of whom married each other in couples over the last year and 3 months. And I have them talk to my patrons recently because they're so fast at turning things around. I really, really admire that. It's just not what I did. What I did, I don't admire. What they did, I do. But this is in the trend. The stellar young people who aren't getting swept up in the culture are coming into Catholicism, and it's not LARPing the way Julia Yost attributes it. Are these hip urban converts sincere, or are they just role-playing? Now, the next section in the week article is not the Julia Yost article. This is the week article. Are the converts just posers? And they misspell the word posers, which is kind of posery. Yost concedes that this trendy Catholicism may be partly a pose, but insists that Dime Square, the hip urbanite Catholic center of New York, is, quote, not the first social scene whose Catholicism was dismissed as insincere, end quote. She could have combated this a little harder. The Week says, if you think about it, they're not so different from Oscar Wilde and this fellow fin de siècle decadents, many of whom crossed the Tiber. Well, none of us are I've never been convinced that Oscar Wilde was just a poser. Thank you very much. In the realm of fashion, Catholic iconography, and trad styles, this is a secular left magazine. I told you a couple shows ago, this is a transcendent moment, parish orphans. This is a big thing. Catholic iconography and trad styles in the realm of fashion function as reservoirs of the unproblematic exotic. Biz Sherbert wrote at ID, appropriating indigenous spirituality is out, but the Church of Rome won't mind if you borrow its look. Sherbert suggests that the trend has some of its roots in the deviant Catholic schoolgirl style of the 1990s. That was nothing. I remember that. That was just a mischievous, immoral, sexy look. That's not what's going on now. So this is a bad insight, false insight, with this distinction. But this reads more like a salvaging of innocence than an iconoclastic subversion of it. Okay, so you saved the sentence. My bad. Of course, there's still plenty of subversion going on. Take, for example, the fashion label Praying, famous for its white string bikini that labels the goods Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Well, that's vile. Niall Gooch, who converted to Catholicism in 2006, joked in Unheard that he had never been at the cutting edge of fashion before. We should probably not put too much stock in this supposed mini-revival, Gooch continued, noting that full-blooded Catholicism is a demanding way of life. I want to talk about this. It's not merely a means of sticking up two fingers at a suffocating liberal consensus. Well, it can be both. It can be both. We can have a both and, not an either-or psychology in regard to hateful secular culture. I want to talk about that in a second. Even so, Gooch remained cautiously optimistic. That's good. Christianity, he argued, offers a potent antidote for those alienated from a society which manages to be at once both insistently libertine and cruelly unforgiving. That's good writing by Gooch. So then they talk about the rise of the new right. I just want to, re-intone what Gooch says here about, like, well, I'm cautiously optimistic. A trend, of course, a true trend of religious revival would mean that Catholic evangelization is working. It would mean that the new Mass is, I guess we would assume it's working as a form of evangelization. And neither of those are my assumptions. So how do I still remain with Gooch cautiously optimistic? Well, I'm just saying that there's not a mutual exclusion between the idea of holding up two fingers, you know which ones, one on each hand, to the secular culture, and at the same time, having a sincere reversion or conversion to Roman Catholicism. It can be a both and. Now, I do think that there's something to be said for the danger of living in big cities and getting swept up in a kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, pious chic, nerdy chic, a hipster thing. Remember when the Buddy Holly glasses were big in Brooklyn 10 years ago? That should never be cool, right? And so I don't want Roman Catholicism to be, I don't want Roman Catholicism to be a quote-unquote nerdy thing like Buddy Holly glasses that comes back into Brooklyn or Dime Square unless they mean it. And if they mean it, then the first proposition they understand is there's not a dang bit of it that is nerdy. I want to get to this passage about a Muslim saying, hey, if anything's going to trend, if you want hardcore stuff, you should be Muslim because I fast 30 days of the year during Ramadan. For 12 or 14 hours, bub. I just had Father Allen on this show who fasted for 57 days, nothing but water. Get real, the Ramadan fast. Get out of here, man. Also, I fast every Monday and every Wednesday of the entire year, unless I'm really sick or something. And again, there are Catholics that do way more than me. But I do Monday, Wednesday, Friday during Lent. Not that hardcore. A lot of you guys do more than me. And it's sundown to sundown, or I just don't eat until 3. A black fast a lot of days. That's nothing. So many priests do so much more than me, and I'm not pretending I'm really good at this because, like I said, my friend Father Allen did a 40-day fast. I'm like, I'm going to try a Triduum fast. I've never fasted for all 3 days. I got like a little over half of that. So, but black fasts, I meant Wednesdays and Fridays. Yeah, that's at least 104 times a year if I do it every time. So, yes, Catholicism is much more hardcore than Islam. Sorry. Ramadan fasting, get real. Now, to be fair, we all know what the council did to the appearance of Catholicism. It doesn't look hardcore at all. The next section is called The Rise of the New Right in the Week article. Listen to this. Yost's essay drew heavily on James Pogue's April profile of the New Right. His far-ranging piece touched on an interconnected web of figures, including Senate candidates Blake Masters, J.D. Vance, political theorist Curtis Yarvin, interesting cat, billionaire Peter Thiel, Trumpian film director Amanda Milius, and Compact founder Sohrab Ahmari, formerly of New York Post. Pogue observed that the new rightish politics have become quietly edgy and cool in new tech outposts like Miami and Austin and in downtown Manhattan. And this is a good replacement for libertarianism, which at the tech outposts, if you wanted to be a rebel 15 years ago, you were a libertarian. Who was talking about this recently? Just listening to someone talk about this. Now, at the tech outposts, if you want to be edgy, you're just like, I'm a trad Catholic. And it's a thing. Like I said, it's a real moment for trad Catholicism. In these hip enclaves, signifiers like a demure cross necklace have become markers of transgressive chic. And as one of Pogue's friends told him, casual sex is out. Yeah. The new right isn't exclusively Catholic, but Vance and Ahmari are both converts, and Pogue writes that people are converting to Catholicism in Manhattan new right scene. And I would say, as I've pointed out several times on this show, that among the post-liberals and the integralists in academia, they're almost exclusively Catholic. So, Deneen, Hanby, Vermeulen, Gladden Papin, names like these are all very Catholic. Even what Sohrab Ahmari does as a more popular editor, he channels the energy of these academics I just listed and many more Even Scott Hahn now has thrown his hat into the ring, and they're all leading the new right, nanny state conservatism from a certain understanding of Catholicism. Now, it's definitely not the only understanding of Catholicism. You know my view. I have strong views on this. I've expressed them in a book, Catholic Republic. But to say the least, yeah, the new right is largely fashioned by Roman Catholicism. And as I said 3 shows ago, look at the Supreme Court. Look at National Review. Look at Breitbart. Look, and these are kind of passé to reference. No one really references National Review much anymore, or Breitbart. But during the first part of the Trump presidency, these guys kind of slayed themselves over Trump. But Breitbart, National Review, The Federalist is more current as a kind of conservative thought leader in terms of a weblog. All of the best writers are Catholic. All the best writers are Catholic. All the best thinkers are Catholic. Folks are converting to Catholicism. We talked about Shia tons over the last week. Britney Spears converted in a less sincere way. Kent State gun girl. We've been talking about this. It is a transcendent moment. And it has everything to do with a bad combination of a bad force, the secular culture worse than it's ever been, feminism, homosexualism, transsexualism, and then also another bad force, post-conciliar spirit of Vatican II-ism. So they're driven into looking into Catholicism by the bad secular culture, and then they're leapfrogging right over having a period of wishy-washy center-left Catholicism, because as they research as adult converts or reverts, they're like, nah, I want to skip over that period of conciliar-style Catholicism and go right to trad. This is what we're talking about with Shia LaBeouf. He skipped over the wishy-washy Catholic period that a lot of us cradle Catholics had. Good for him. This is kind of what I'm talking about, even semi-reverts like young people who are 23, 24. Maybe technically they're cradle Catholics, but they weren't away from the faith long enough to even count as reverts. They're just cutting out the wishy-washy adult years of half-assed Catholicism, and good for them. If I'd have done the same thing, throughout my mid-20s, I'd probably have 2-3 more kids, right? Probably 1 or 2 more kids. And every kid you have is the greatest blessing you're ever going to get, along with a good wife or a good husband. Greatest material blessing. It's just, I wish I had 1 or 2 more. We have 7 now. I wish I had 8 or 9, 10. Just days after Pogue's profile dropped, New York Times opinion columnist Michelle Goldberg published a piece headlined, "The Awful Advent of Reactionary Chic." Goldberg doesn't address the connection between the new right and Catholicism, but she does suggest that the entire fad will come to a screeching halt next time the right takes power nationally. Eventually, an avant-garde flirtation with reaction will collide with the brutish, Philistine reality of conservative rule, she wrote. This is just ridiculous. I don't even need to comment. Goldberg also argued that the reactionary chic scene doesn't have a coherent worldview. That is nonsense. If you're emplacing Catholicism at the center of the new right, I'd say do it in the correct integralist way that Catholic Republic does. But if it is emplaced there for the purposes of a thought experiment, then this is the ultimate single package worldview. This is a stupid claim. If, for the sake of the argument, Catholicism is leading the new right, the Catholic intellectual tradition, or some iteration of it, a post-liberal integralism, or in my case, a sort of neo-Confederate integralism, then that is a packaged worldview. It tells you how to live, how to fast, how to pray, how to go to liturgy, how to evangelize, day in, day out. What do you mean it doesn't have a coherent worldview? If it doesn't have a coherent worldview, then the new right doesn't have Catholicism. Catholicism is the ultimate coherent worldview. That's just a fact. And it's united by nothing more than anti-wokeness and a desire to apporter la bourgeoisie. So, yeah, that's what I would say to Peter Thiel. That's what I would say to Peter Boghossian or James Lindsay or Jordan Peterson. These guys are just represented by anti-wokeness and a desire to poke the thumb in the eye of the new secular petty bourgeois, I agree. But if it's informed by Catholicism, which was your claim after all, the week, then it's got the ultimate single package worldview. Remember what I said the other day. Repeat this after me. Never forget it. I had this insight the other day. Catholicism is the show and tell faith. It's the one true faith. It's the one world religion that is show and tell. Now, when it comes to evangelization, you need a little bit of showing. You don't want to be a hypocrite as to the proposition that God is love. But you mainly still need telling. You do something nice for someone and you say, I did this because of Jesus. That's it. If not for Jesus, who cares? I could be as mean as I want. If there was no Jesus, I could be as mean as I wanted. Like Ivan Karamazov said, without God, everything's permitted. So you can't do the post-conciliar butt philosophy liberal thing of just doing something nice for someone. They might think that you're a secular altruist. Animal altruism's the thing. They'll say, no, it's not. Have you ever seen a chimp at the zoo? These are the meanest bastards in creation. Chimpanzees, animal altruism, nature is red in tooth and claw. Chimpanzees, monkeys are the meanest of all the animals because they have big brains, the bigger brains than all of them. They're just mean. Monkeys would need Jesus if they actually had a soul, which they don't. So we're the show and tell faith. And what did the secular liberals do with regard to evangelization? They blocked the telling. They only let you show evangelization. Just ask what any Karen, Susan from the parish council, any big Roman Catholic high school, how are they saying to evangelize? Show, don't tell. What do they do with the liturgy in most Novus Ordos? Arguably all. They only tell you that the Eucharist is the source and the summit. Technically, Eucharistic prayer number 3 tells you. Eucharistic prayer number 2 or 4 tells you. Yeah, but you're not showing me. With the liturgy, they blocked off the more important part. You still need to be shown and told in the liturgy that the Eucharist is the source and the summit, the center of the Mass. They only tell you there. It's the opposite of the new evangelization. They will not show you. Showing you that the Eucharist is the source and the summit means the priest is turning his back. He's facing the same way as he consecrates. He venerates that host like it is the most valuable substance in the world. And it is, the Eucharistic substance. It is Jesus' body, blood, soul, divinity. I couldn't take this seriously. A friend of mine who teaches Catholic school did a survey, and it was like 85% of the students didn't even know that de fide, this is what we believe. Not de facto. De fide. He doesn't even know that this is technically, yes, the Eucharistic substance is body, blood, soul, divinity, because we're not being shown. So we're only told that the liturgy is what it is, never shown. We're only shown Christian love when we see examples of evangelization. We're never told. They blocked off the more important part. It's not a 50-50 showing and telling. It's context specific. The bulkier part of evangelization is telling. The bulkier part of liturgy is showing, but we technically need all of it, all the time. And the miraculous part, my friends, is the following. That still, Roman Catholicism is trending in one way or another. It's having a transcendent Shia LaBeouf, Shia surprise, Hollywood superstar surprise moment. All the same, even as we have a pope and arguably popes over the last 50 to 70 years that have run this psyop within the church of blocking the telling from evangelization and blocking the showing from the liturgy. And still, the church is weaker than it's ever been, and still we're having a transcendent moment where secular rags like the New York Times, Slate, The Atlantic, I covered that last week, The Week, they're all saying there's something trendy, reactionary chic is what it must be, about Roman Catholicism. And this is while we have the worst pope who's ever sat on the throne of Peter, number 266. And this is when the church is undergoing its worst crisis, far worse than the Arian crisis of the 4th century, far worse than the Monophysite crisis of the late 4th, early 5th century, far worse than Nestorianism of the 5th century, far worse than even the Protestant Reformation, the heretics, the Protestants, far worse than the Great Schism of the 11th century, far worse than the Great Western Schism and the Avignon Papacy of the 14th century. It's worse than all that. And in this post-Protestant fallen republic that's corrupted and transsexual now, people are still getting it, even though never before in the history of the church did the Pope silence our own Catholic voice. He's got both his hands around my throat as a Catholic influencer saying, don't evangelize. That's proselytizing. Don't show what the Eucharist really is. It's Jesus' body, blood, soul, divinity, and it's saving. Don't show that in the Mass. And people are still coming. Just because it's the one true faith. It's because of Fatima. It's because of the Eucharistic miracles. It's because of the beauty of Jesus on the cross. I mean, I'm thinking about this today, lamenting the death of a loved one. This is hardcore. This is reactionary chic. Our symbol is, in Muslims think that their 12 hours of fasting 30 days in a row is more hardcore than this. That's bananas. That's embarrassing. God on a cross is reactionary chic. The Eucharist, the transformation of a non-consecrated host into Jesus' body and blood that we're to consume, that's reactionary chic. Not having sex till you're married, that's just common sense. Idiots, have you seen that? Have you seen that video yet of, McDonald's? A guy with a baby mama that's got like multiple other baby daddies arguing horribly over having multiple baby daddies. Do you know how horrible that would be? You don't even have to be particularly virtuous to not want that. Keep it in your pants till you're married. That's just common sense. That means you're moderately observant. That doesn't even mean you're particularly virtuous. You think that's reactionary chic? Keeping it in your pants till you're married? Not using pornography, which is filthy and disgusting anyway, and for cucks? No way. What's reactionary chic is the cross. Sorry about the battery, gang. Since I'm just reading anyway, I'll read the next section. There's no scene to be seen, says the weak. In response to Yost's claim that Dimes Square turn toward Rome signals a culture-wide shift, the Washington Post's Taylor Lorenz tweeted, "No, it literally doesn't, and in fact, it's the opposite. This entire scene is composed of maybe 2,000 people with zero broader cultural relevance, and the media needs to stop falling for it." Man, this guy, this chick guy, this guy's not my kind of guy, as Frank Costanza says. Molly Olmstead argued in Slate that the Times was irresponsible to publish a piece treating reactionary Catholicism as a fun, innocuous trend. Me and Frank on Quite Frankly's channel, we're going over all 3 or 4 of these articles, but most specifically the Slate article. Traditionalist Catholicism, Olmstead writes, attracts those who like to post winkingly about the Crusades. Heck yeah, we do. Deus Volt. Punk. And who campaign for the stripping of rights from women and queer people. Nope. Just everything you're calling a right is bunk. It's not a constitutional right to marry your armchair or your best friend. So nope, they're not real rights. Say it correctly. We're just saying define natural rights properly, idiot. At The Atlantic, Daniel Penitin, I covered this a lot, wrote that for right-wing Catholics, a rosary beads have been woven into a conspiratorial politics, an absolutist gun culture. No, it's the other way around. Dan Penitin, who they had to like shut off comments and hide him out because the guy looks like he's 12 who wrote this thing, Daniel Penitin. No, it's more like conspiratorial politics and absolutist gun culture come from the rosary. It's not the rosary's been woven into the politics and the gun culture. It's the other way around. Our politics and culture, political culture, come from the beautiful ontology of the rosary. What Christ's mother calls us to. Not the other way around. Get it straight. Both Olmsted and Penitent noted that these Catholic reactionaries are far outside the mainstream of the post-Vatican II American Church. Atheist Hemant Mehta of explicitly non-religious publication Only Sky, you can guess what the meaning of that title is, went further, attacking not just traditionalists in the church, but the Catholic Church itself as an institution where child sexual abuse has been a rampant problem for decades. Yeah, it has. You know which decades? Guess when? Guess when that started? It started when Stalin and the communists and the Masons started infiltrating Roman Catholicism with your groomers, whose rights you just decried, whose abysmal lack of rights in the Roman Catholic Church you just decried. When the groomers were deliberately infiltrated in, and the good priests were vanished by Stalin and the Marxists and the Masons, that's when the grooming started. Is that shocking? That groomers bring with them grooming? With groomers come grooming. Is that a conspiratorial politics and culture? Tough guy? Hemant Mehta? No, that's just common sense. When you bring groomers into the faith, you get grooming. And this guy says it. He's like, we like the groomers culture. In so many words, he says it. But then he's like, but we don't like grooming when it's happening in Roman Catholic Church. We like all these homosexuals. They should be allowed to be priests, I think a liberal like him would say. Well, this is what happens. You get all the grooming. Not bright. Where abortion rights and the existence of transgender people are both denied. Hells yeah. Where same-sex marriage, don't say it right. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as same-sex marriage. It's considered immoral. Well, say it right. There's no such thing as same-sex marriage. Same-sex sexual relationships are considered one of the 6 or 7 sins that cry out to heaven for retaliation or whatever it's called from the heavens. Just say it correct. I forget there's another translation of the term. But yeah, get it right. You're trying to make Catholicism sound reactionary chic. You're not even getting it straight. You're getting it twisted. Where financial scandals never cease. Well, that's true. That's because of the groomers. Look, they have groomers and the LGBT priests in the Roman Catholic Church. They got expensive tastes, man. Orgies cost money at the CDF. Male prostitutes, all that. You know how many times stuff like that's been busted up in the last 10 years? At the Holy Office? That's what causes the financial scandals. Traditional values, this blessed Son of God says, are out of date for a good reason. And then there's a section, what do Catholics have to say? And I don't care. I can't even read it without getting mad. I want to close with what I promised I would close with. Sarah Haji wrote this at Gawker, that if Dime Square crowd really wanted to be subversive, they'd embrace Islam. Nah. What are you talking about? That's not subversive at all. I mean, I get what you're saying. Their treatment of women isn't in, but they step between the raindrops with you left liberals somehow. You guys never, ever talk about their overly harsh treatment of women or homosexuals in Islam. It's weird, right? You say that we're the harshest, Roman Catholics. We just say it with homosexualism. This is a mortal sin every time, 100 times out of 100. Convert. Be a celibate. Like the priest that helps to convert you if you're SSA. It's not reactionary chic. That's moderate. The Lord loves all of us, every human being. Just be celibate. You can go to heaven, even if you're attracted to dudes or whatever. That's not as extreme in that sense as Islam. Okay, I'll give her that. And women, yeah, don't beat your women. Catholics, that's bad. It's horrible. That's not a Catholic thing. That's a Muslim thing. But yeah, they should be at home. They should be protected. They shouldn't be, you shouldn't be farming out a second income via your wife. That's the most respectful way I can put it. That's not reactionary chic. That's just common sense. That's just common sense. Paul VI, the liberal, wrote that in Humanae Vitae. If we put them in the workplace, they're going to be getting sexualized. With contraception. It's the only way to keep them in the workplace. Come on. So Islam's extreme in those two ways. Too much. Too much. But that's not what she's talking about. She's talking about fasting. As much as I respect Catholicism, you can't pretend that Lent, 40 days where you decide to not eat chocolate or whatever because it's your vice. Chocolate ain't a vice. And in 40 days, people ought to be fasting. Hardcore. Black fasting. Last couple Lents, I was black fasting almost every one of those 40 days. No food until 3. Okay, Ramadan's 30 days. And that's not even particularly good. I just told you. I don't eat meat on Fridays all year long. That's not even particularly good. A lot of you guys do better. Some people do a 40-day fast without any food, not only when it's dark outside. Get real. This is not just a baby version of the 30 days a year I spend starving myself during Ramadan. You're not starving yourself. You're just not eating while the sun's up. Catholicism is for the weak. Call me when you're ready for Hajj. No thanks. No thanks. No thanks. Call us when you're ready to embrace a real challenge. Traditional, which is to say real Catholicism. Even after, all my people know this, parish orphans and retrogrades, even after the council, you still are supposed to abstain from meat on Fridays. Now they just give you this little buyout that everyone buys out. You can do an alternate penance. No, you're supposed to abstain from meat on Friday. If you guys didn't know that, abstain from meat on Fridays on ordinary Fridays. Okay? And try to do mini fasting on every Wednesday and Friday of the year, for heaven's sakes. But anyway, you get the point. It's a transcendent moment for Catholicism. It is trending. I don't like calling it a trend any more than you do, but I don't know what the linguistic difference is when we say it's trending. I hope it's a meaningful thing that's trending. I hope it's meaningfully transcendent, not just for a moment, but that all the folks that have embraced the one true faith hold it in their hearts every day of the year, every year, until they die. And it's hard sometimes. Not just because of Pope Francis, but largely because of him. Not just because of Spirit of Vatican II, but largely because of it. It's hard it's especially hard in the age of martyrs. It's hard if your Pope is Pius X or Pius V or Leo XIII. Real good exemplars. It's hard because it's hard. It's hard because this Muslim who wrote this is wrong. One final thing, I also heard Michael Malice, I know it's an interview that's due to come out today. My friend Seamus of Freedom Tunes has gone on Michael Malice's show, and they mentioned me, or Seamus mentioned me, and they were talking about Vatican II, and Seamus wanted to dot his I's and cross his T's, get it all correct. Why are we trad Catholics so sick of the weakness and effeminacy portrayed by the church after the council? And he did such an excellent job. I was so proud of him. His answer, he's worried about it. I'm like, this is one of the best answers I've ever heard. It was like second to Shia LaBeouf's answers only. I'm like, man, these answers, even he said like, I don't normally talk about this. I make cartoons that are political and smart for a living, but I'm getting new at talking about my faith publicly because people know about it because of this transcendent moment. He said something like this to Michael Malice, did Seamus, and then he proceeded to give this perfect answer as to why we Catholics are sick of the weak portrayal. The anodyne defanged, deballed portrayal of Catholicism since the time of the council. And this tangle of what did the council have to do with the enervating of Roman Catholicism? Well, it's not the documents, but it's like everything else. But I mean, even the fact that Michael Malice is talking about this so much, he's not a Catholic. It feels like he's talking about it. He talked about it some with Knowles 6 months ago. Talking about it with Seamus. Hi, Abby. It's transcendent. So I didn't want to not cover it just because it's like, oh, Catholics shouldn't get all hopped up because they throw us a bone, the secular left rags. No, I don't care what they're throwing us. What I care about is that we can make this trend continue. And we will. We will. But be a sign of love, be a sign of contradiction, be a sign of traditionalism, but not in the LARPy way. Be in the world, but not of the world. Most of all, be a sign of what we're called to be, saintliness. Deus Vult, people. God bless you.